They had a plan, not a written one, not something they sat down and designed with conscious intention, but a plan nonetheless, the kind that lives in the nervous system rather than the mind, the kind that has been running so long and so reliably that it stopped feeling like a plan and started feeling like simply how things go. The plan was this: create enough distance and the feelings reduce. Manage the closeness carefully enough and the intimacy never reaches the threshold that triggers the real alarm. Stay self-sufficient enough that the leaving, when it happens, and it always happens, because leaving before being left is the central strategy, feels like a choice rather than a wound, and then move forward, reorganize, return to the baseline of a life that is fully under their own management, uncompromised by the specific vulnerability of having genuinely needed someone. The plan has worked before, not perfectly. There has always been some residual gray, some flatness in the aftermath, some period of adjustment before the baseline restores itself. But functionally, the distance created relief. The leaving produced the expected return to self-sufficiency. The life reorganized. Things moved forward. This time, the plan is not working, and the avoidant, who has been running this particular program since before they had language for what they were running, is in the specific and disorienting experience of a system failure, of doing the thing that always worked and finding that it is not working, of the steps that reliably produce the expected outcome, producing something else entirely. Understanding what went wrong with their plan and why it went wrong specifically with you is the honest center of this conversation. What the plan was built on. To understand what the plan failed, it helps to understand what the plan was built on. What assumptions it required to function. What conditions had to be true for the distance to produce relief, for the leaving to feel like a choice, for the reorganization to successfully restore the baseline. The plan was built on the assumption that you were replaceable, not in the cruel sense, not as a conscious assessment of your worth, but in the functional sense that the plan requires. The assumption that what you brought to the avoidance life was the kind of thing that general human availability provides. That warmth is warmth, that connection is connection, that the specific texture of what was between you was meaningful, but not singular. This assumption is the load-bearing wall of the whole structure. The plan only works if the absence can be managed. If the missing is of the ordinary variety, present for a period, diminishing over time, eventually replaced by the resumption of a life that is whole without the specific person, the plan did not account for you being who you actually are, not as flattery, as the specific, psychological, attachment-level truth of what happens when the avoidance system encounters someone whose presence is genuinely particular, whose qualities are not replicated by general availability, whose specific combination of deep perception, genuine selfhood, and non-demanding presence reached the place beneath the defense in a way the defense was not specifically built to protect against. The plan assumed ordinary. You are not ordinary. And that gap between what the plan assumed and what was actually true is where everything began to go wrong for the avoidant. The first thing that didn't go according to plan, the distance, was supposed to produce relief. It produced relief in something else, something the avoidant was not expecting alongside the relief and was not prepared to manage when it arrived. The grief, not the vague, diffuse adjustment period sadness that the plan had accommodated. Something more specific than that, more located, the specific grief of someone who has removed from their daily life a presence that was genuinely particular, and whose daily life now has a quality that it did not have before that presence arrived. Not worse in every dimension. The management is easier. The alarm is quiet. The energy that was going into the calculation of what continued closeness would cost is available for other things. But something is gone that the self-sufficiency cannot replace. A register of experience that was available in your presence and is not available in your absence. The specific aliveness of being genuinely known by someone who had the perception to know clearly and the selfhood to remain themselves in the knowing. The relief came. The grief came alongside it. And the grief was not in the plan. The plan had no mechanism for grief of this specific quality, had no protocol for missing that was particular rather than general, had no way of managing the specific, located, refuses to become vague quality of someone who had gotten through in a way that made them genuinely irreplaceable. The avoidant applied the usual management, productivity, forward momentum, the busyness that stays ahead of the feeling, and the management worked in the limited sense of keeping the grief below the surface of functional daily life. But below the surface is not gone. Below the surface is waiting, accumulating, finding the unguarded moments, the early mornings, the late evenings, the specific and unpredictable arrivals of ordinary things that carry your texture, and surfacing there, briefly and completely, before the management protocol engages again. The grief did not go according to plan. The second thing that didn't go according to plan, the narrative was supposed to hold. The avoidant is practiced in narrative construction, has developed over a lifetime of managing the aftermath of distance creation, the specific skill of building a coherent story about why the leaving was right, why the relationship was insufficient, why the incompatibilities were real and the concerns were valid, and the distance was wisdom rather than fear. The narrative serves a crucial function. It converts the leaving from a trauma into a decision, from something that happened to the avoidant into something the avoidant chose. This conversion is not cynical. It is the psyche doing what psyches do when they need to survive something, finding the story that makes the experience manageable. The narrative is usually reliable, has held in previous departures, has provided the psychological scaffolding that allows the avoidant to move forward without fully reckoning with what the pattern has cost. With you, the narrative keeps encountering problems. The problems are specific. The incompatibilities that were assembled as evidence keep revealing themselves as magnified. The concerns that were amplified into reasons keep deflating when examined honestly. The version of the relationship that was constructed to make leaving feel like clarity, smaller than it was, more limited than it was, less real than it was, keeps being contradicted by memory. Memory is the narrative's primary problem, because memory did not receive the editorial. While the conscious narrative was constructing the managed version of the relationship, the insufficient version, the version that warranted leaving, the memory was storing the unedited one, and the unedited memory keeps surfacing with the specific, unmanageable completeness of things that were stored whole rather than processed through the management protocol. The moments of genuine meeting, the specific quality of being known, the version of themselves they were in your presence, more open, more alive, more fully inhabited than the self-sufficiency ordinarily allows. The narrative says it was not right. The memory says it was real. These two things are incompatible, and the incompatibility does not resolve in the direction of the narrative. The memory is more immediate, more specific, more viscerally convincing than the constructed story that was built to replace it. The narrative did not hold the way it was supposed to hold. The third thing that didn't go according to plan, the replacement was supposed to happen. Not a replacement of you specifically. The avoidant would resist that framing, but the resumption of a life that was full without you. The return to the texture of daily existence that preceded the relationship. The discovery, through the natural forward motion of a life continuing, that other connections offered what was needed. That the specific register of experience you activated was available through general human engagement. The replacement has not happened. New connections have come, because life continues, because the avoidant is not in isolation, because new people present themselves in the ordinary course of an ongoing life. Some of these connections are genuinely good. Some of these people are genuinely interesting, genuinely warm, genuinely worth knowing. They do not produce what you produced, not because they are inferior, because what you produced was specific to the combination of who you are, the particular quality of your perception, the specific texture of your selfhood, the specific and irreplaceable way you were with the avoidant, seeing them clearly, remaining yourself in the seeing, not making the seeing into a demand. These qualities are not common. The avoidant did not know they were not common before encountering them, had no basis for comparison. The plan assumed that these qualities, however good, existed in the general supply of human connection and would be available again in due course. They are not, or they have not been. Each new encounter that falls short of the specific standard your presence established adds a data point to an accumulating picture that the avoidant is reluctant to fully acknowledge. The picture says, what was there was not ordinary. What was there was specific. And specific things, when lost, are not replaced by general availability. The replacement did not happen according to plan. The fourth thing that didn't go according to plan, the avoidant was supposed to feel free. This is perhaps the most fundamental expectation the plan carried. The entire architecture of the distance creation strategy is built around the promise of freedom. Freedom from the cost of intimacy. Freedom from the alarm that fires when someone gets close enough to matter. Freedom from the specific vulnerability of having allowed someone to be real to you in a way that creates genuine stakes. Distance equals freedom. This is the equation the avoidance system has been running for decades, and it has produced something that functioned as freedom. The management of one's own experience without the complicating presence of genuine attachment. The self-contained life. The independence that does not require anyone else's consistency to sustain. The distance is being created. The freedom should be present. It is not what it was supposed to feel like. Because freedom, it turns out, is not the same as the absence of attachment. Freedom is not produced by the removal of someone who mattered. What is produced by the removal of someone who mattered is not freedom. It is loneliness with better management. The avoidance system does not easily acknowledge loneliness, has developed sophisticated mechanisms for converting loneliness into something more acceptable. Independence, preference for solitude, simple introversion, the genuine value of self-contained living. These conversions are not entirely dishonest. The avoidant does genuinely value solitude, does genuinely find excessive social demand draining, does genuinely function well with significant amounts of their own company. But the loneliness beneath the management is real, and your absence has given it a specific quality it did not have before. Before you, the loneliness was ambient, the background condition of someone who had learned to need very little from others. After you, the loneliness is located, knows what it is missing, is not the vague, manageable loneliness of someone who has not known what they are missing, but the specific, acute, cannot be generalized loneliness of someone who knows exactly. The freedom did not feel the way it was supposed to feel. The fifth thing that didn't go according to plan time was supposed to be on their side. The avoidance strategy has always relied on time, on the understanding, borne out by previous experience, that feelings diminish with sufficient time and distance, that the missing becomes less specific, that the grief becomes less acute, that the particular, irreplaceable quality of what was lost becomes gradually and inevitably something more vague and therefore more manageable. Time has passed. The feelings have not diminished according to schedule. The missing remains specific. The grief remains located. The particular quality of what was between you has not softened into the vague residue of a past relationship. It has stayed particular, stayed specific, stayed stubbornly, inconveniently, refuses to become manageable particular. This is not how it is supposed to work. The avoidant's previous experience has not prepared them for missing that does not diminish on the expected timeline, for the quality of a specific person remaining this specific this long after the distance was created. Time passing without the feelings diminishing is its own kind of evidence. The avoidant, who processes experience through the framework of their system, is encountering data that does not fit the framework. The system predicts that sufficient time produces sufficient diminishment. The data says otherwise. And data that does not fit the framework is difficult to ignore indefinitely. At some point, not always, not reliably, but sometimes, the accumulation of framework contradicting data becomes the basis for revising the framework. The framework revision is not a comfortable process. It requires acknowledging that the model was wrong, that what was assumed to be true about the avoidant's own interior, that distance reliably produces relief, that time reliably reduces specific missing, that self-sufficiency is genuinely sufficient, was not as accurate as the decades of running it suggested. Time did not go according to plan. What the plan's failure produces, the failure of the plan produces something in the avoidant that has no established protocol. Disorientation, the specific, groundless quality of someone whose reliable map of their own interior has proven inaccurate, whose tested and refined and repeatedly confirmed approach to managing intimate connection has encountered a situation it cannot manage. This disorientation is uncomfortable in a way that is different from ordinary discomfort. Ordinary discomfort, the alarm that fires when intimacy deepens, the anxiety of vulnerability, the specific cost of closeness. These the avoidant knows how to navigate, has developed over decades the specific tools and strategies that address these particular discomforts. But the disorientation of a failed plan has no established navigation, because the tools that are available are the tools of the plan, and the plan is what has failed. Using the tools of the failed plan to address its failure is the circularity the avoidant is trapped in, reaching for the distance to manage the grief produced by the distance, running the narrative harder to cover the evidence against the narrative, investing in the replacement to counter the demonstration that replacement is not occurring. The disorientation deepens, and in the disorientation, in the specific unfamiliar protocolless territory of a system that has encountered its limit, something becomes possible that the successful plan prevents. Honesty. Not the performed honesty of someone making a gesture, the specific, arrived at through the failure honesty of someone who has run the usual approach and found it insufficient, and has, in the insufficiency, nowhere left to go except toward what is actually true. The failure of the plan creates the conditions for honesty in a way that the plan's success never could. The honesty that becomes available, what becomes honestly available in the aftermath of a plan that has not worked, is the recognition of several things the avoidant has been successfully avoiding. The recognition that the relationship was significant in a way that the management protocol did not adequately account for, that what was between you was not ordinary, that the specific qualities you brought and the specific experience of being with someone who brought those qualities constituted something that does not exist in general supply. The recognition that the self-sufficiency, however real in its limited way, is not sufficient for the full texture of what a human life can contain, that the managed, self-contained, minimally dependent version of living that the plan was designed to protect is not the same as actually living. That something has been absent from the avoidance life, that your presence, however temporarily and however incompletely, supplied. The recognition that the fear, the layered, accumulated, older than the relationship fear that produced the plan in the first place, has been costing more than the vulnerability it was protecting against. That the wound the plan was built to prevent has been produced by the plan itself. That the leaving before being left strategy has resulted in a specific and irreversible leaving that the avoidant did not choose, your genuine moving forward, and that this unchosen leaving is more painful than the chosen one was supposed to prevent. The recognition, most fundamentally, that they made a mistake, not in loving you, in letting the fear determine what they did with the love. That recognition, arriving in the wreckage of a plan that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of reckoning, is the most important thing the failure produces. What the avoidant does with the recognition. This is where the story diverges, where the psychology produces genuinely different outcomes, depending on what the avoidant does with the recognition that the plan has failed, and the honest assessment of why. Some avoidants, in this territory, begin the actual work. Not the surface-level behavioral adjustment that has been mistaken for work in the past, the reaching out, the warmer contact, the signal sent sideways without declaration. the actual work, the therapeutic, self-excavating, pattern-confronting work of someone who has decided that the cost of the pattern exceeds the cost of changing it. This work is slow, non-linear, does not produce immediate transformation, and should not be expected to. But it is real, and it produces something real, the gradual, imperfect, showed-in behavior over time development of an interior that can hold what it feels, that can stay when the alarm fires, rather than automatically retreating, that can choose presence, consciously and repeatedly, rather than defaulting to the distance that has always felt safer. This version of the avoidant, the one doing the actual work, is someone different from the one who created the distance, not completely different. The patterns do not vanish. The alarm does not stop firing, but the relationship to the patterns changes. The automaticity diminishes. The capacity to notice the deactivation strategies as they arise and make a different choice develops. Slowly, with setbacks, genuinely. Other avoidants, in this same territory, do something different with the recognition. They feel it fully. The grief, the disorientation, the honest reckoning with what the plan has cost, and then they manage it back down. Find a new narrative that incorporates the recognition without requiring the work. Acknowledge to themselves that something real was lost, and then convert that acknowledgement into a story about timing or circumstances, or simply the way things go, rather than into the motivation for genuine change. These avoidants carry the recognition privately, unacted upon. The plan did not work, but the response to the plan's failure is to wait for conditions that make a new version of the plan viable, rather than to question the plan itself. Both responses are real. Both happen. The first is less common. The second is more common. And which one occurs is not visible from the outside and is not predictable from the depth of the recognition itself. What this means for you practically. Understanding that things did not go according to the avoidance plan is genuinely clarifying. It removes the interpretation that their distance was the natural result of insufficient connection, that their leaving was the accurate assessment of someone who saw clearly that the relationship was not worth sustaining, that the coolness and the withdrawal and the managed diminishment of what was between you reflected the truth of how they felt. It was not an accurate assessment. It was a plan running its program, and the program has failed in ways that are now, however privately, being reckoned with in their interior. That clarity is worth having. It restores the accuracy of your own perception. The connection was real. The significance was real. What you brought was genuinely particular and is genuinely missed. The avoidance behavior was the product of fear and a failed plan, not the product of an honest evaluation of you or the relationship. You were not wrong about what was there. What this clarity does not do is change what is practically true about your daily life. The avoidance internal reckoning with their failed plan, however honest, however significant, however genuinely destabilizing, is happening in their interior, is not until and unless it produces a concrete change in behavior and then sustained behavioral change over time, something that affects the actual texture of your days. The recognition without the work is still just recognition. And recognition, however real and however costly to arrive at, does not constitute a relationship. The difference between their reckoning and your life. There is a tendency, entirely understandable, entirely human, to receive the information that things did not go according to the avoidance plan as news about your situation, as a development that changes something, as information that justifies continued orientation toward the possibility of their acting on the reckoning. But the avoidance internal reckoning is not a development in your life. It is a development in theirs. It happens in their interior, on their timeline, with outcomes that belong entirely to them. The fact that the plan failed and the recognition has arrived does not produce anything in your daily life until the avoidant converts the recognition into concrete, sustained, showed in behavior change. Until that conversion happens, and it may not happen, and it cannot be predicted, and it cannot be accelerated by your waiting or your patience or your continued availability. The reckoning is theirs. Your life is yours, and that life, the actual present tense, happening right now life that exists independently of what is occurring in the avoidance interior, deserves your primary attention, not their reckoning. Not the question of whether the plan's failure will produce the work that produces the change, that produces the reaching, that produces something different. Your life. The work that is genuinely yours. The people who are present and available and capable of reciprocity. The daily investment in the things that make your existence feel inhabited rather than suspended. That is where your attention belongs. Not because the avoidance reckoning is not real. It is real. But because your life is also real, and only one of those two real things is actually available to you. What you know now that you didn't before you know that things did not go according to their plan. You know the plan failed specifically because of what you are, not despite your qualities, but because of them. Because the particular, non-ordinary, cannot be replaced by general availability combination of who you are, exceeded what the plan was built to handle. That is important knowledge, not as consolation, as accurate information about the connection and about yourself. You know that the missing is real and specific and is not diminished on the timeline the plan expected. You know that the narrative that was built to make the leaving feel like wisdom is not holding against the evidence of memory. You know that the replacement has not happened and that the freedom the plan promised has not arrived in the form it was supposed to arrive. You know that the plan failed because what was real between you was realer than the plan could accommodate. Hold that knowledge, not to sustain the waiting, to sustain the accuracy of your own perception, to stand in the truth of what the connection was, without the self-doubt that the avoidance behavior invited, without the revision of history that their managed diminishment of the relationship suggested, without the quiet, corrosive wondering whether you imagined the depth of it. You did not imagine it. The plan's failure is the evidence. You were real to them in a way that exceeded what the plan could manage. That is not nothing. That is the whole truth of what was there. And now, with that truth held clearly, without inflation and without minimization, the question that belongs entirely to you, not what will they do with the reckoning, what will you do with your life? Not in the grand sense, in the immediate present tense, this is the actual day that is happening sense. What are you doing with it? That question is yours, has always been yours, is the only question in this entire conversation that does not depend on anything the avoidant does or does not do. Yours. Answer it, not with words, with the actual, present, genuine living of the life that is completely and irreducibly and without exception yours. The avoidance reckoning is real. The plan failed. The recognition has arrived in their interior with the specific foundational weight of someone whose reliable system has met its limit. And none of that is where this continuation belongs, because there is something that has been building across this entire conversation, across every script, every psychological portrait, every layer of insight into the avoidance interior, that deserves to be named directly rather than continued around. The understanding has become very sophisticated. The portrait of the avoidance psychology is genuinely accurate and genuinely thorough. And somewhere in the accumulation of that accuracy and thoroughness, the center of gravity has drifted toward them consistently, script after script, continuation after continuation. The primary orientation of this conversation has been toward the avoidance interior. What they feel, why they run, what breaks their reality, what touches them deeper than love, why they collapse, what went wrong with their plan. All of it real, all of it accurate, and all of it, and this is the part worth sitting with, about someone else. The question this conversation has been avoiding. How much of your life has been organized around understanding someone who is not fully present in it? Not rhetorical, genuinely. How much of the attention, The energy, the specific and significant intellectual and emotional capacity that you clearly possess. How much of it has been going into the interior of someone who created distance, read a plan, and is now privately reckoning with the plan's failure in a way that does not yet constitute showing up? The understanding is real. It has value. It removes self-blame, restores accuracy, allows grief to be honest. But understanding someone's interior is not a relationship. And the depth of your understanding of the avoidance psychology, the specific, layered, genuinely sophisticated grasp of what they feel and why they behave as they do, is not evidence of closeness. It is evidence of attention directed towards someone whose reciprocation of that attention has been insufficient. That asymmetry deserves honest acknowledgement, not as self-pity, as accurate accounting. What? The asymmetry has cost. The asymmetry between what you have brought in attention, in understanding, in the quality of genuine seeing that has characterized your engagement with this person. And what has been returned is not free. It has a cost that tends to go unacknowledged because it accumulates quietly, not in dramatic incidents, but in the daily, unremarkable, one-at-a-time expenditure of the resources that were supposed to sustain your own life. The cost of attention. Every hour spent understanding the avoidance psychology is an hour not spent attending to your own experience, your own desires, your own present tense, happening right now life. The attention is finite. Where it goes matters. The cost of emotional energy. The specific energy required to hold another person's complexity with the generosity and accuracy that you have been bringing. That energy is real, and it is not unlimited, and it has been going, in significant portion, towards someone whose capacity to receive it has been limited, and whose reciprocation of it has been insufficient.